Hi, my name is Luis Villar, and I will be showing you a demo process on the STX multi-platform transaction server. This process will get information based on the IP address of the calling web client. It will pass this to a task that it will get the geolocation based on that IP address. Then it will get the exchange rate for the colon, which is the Costa Rican money, and compared to the dollar. Then it will go to a MySql database and select a list of mail recipients with a filter by the country ID. This information we got from the first task with the geolocation. Then it will loop for every recipient and send each one an email, and then it will end. Since the STX server is based on BPMN, I will show you now a BPMN representation of this process. Here we have our process in a BPMN representation. We have our start event, which will capture the IP address of the calling web client, and it will pass it to the first task. The first task will go to a website and will get the geolocation information based on the IP address that was captured at the start. If this finishes okay, then we'll go to a SOAP web service to the Costa Rica Central Bank, and where we're going to query for the exchange rate at the time of the query. If this ends okay, then we will take a list from MySql database of mail recipients, and they will be filtered by the country code that was returned from our geolocation task. And then we will pass this list to this next task if it's successful, and this task will basically send the email to each one of the recipients. It'll make the request. If this is okay, we'll send the mail. Then it will ask if there's more recipients. If there's more recipients, then it will come right back and it will loop here until there's no more recipients, and then it'll end successfully. Any error on any of the tasks will return to the error message from the failed process to the end task here with error. I'm gonna execute this process using an HTTP GET request. I've written a page with a single button which will basically execute this process for me from my web browser here in Costa Rica. So I use a jQuery here. This is my button, and on click I will do the get on the IP address. There are no parameters, and on the callback function he'll alert me that it made it to the callback, and I will get the sent element from the XML returned from this process. Here's my single button page. When I click on this button, it will invoke the process. It will get the IP address from my website here in Costa Rica. So when it gets the list of recipients, I'm in the list, so I should be getting an email in a couple of seconds after hitting the button. Waiting for my callback message. There it is, made it to the callback, and an email, which is part of the response that I got from the process. I'll close this, and I should be receiving an email any moment now. There it is. Here we are at the STX server. We're going to go to the logs, select today's date, and select the last transaction. This is the transaction we just did. On our start event, we can see that the IP was captured, and on the GeoIP task, that's the IP we sent with the get method, and here's the information we get back. The country code, Costa Rica, CR. We get our indicator here, and here we see our exchange rate versus the dollar, 568.47. Then we get the emails from a MySql database, and here we basically execute this SQL command, and we select country key, country name, and the email from the email table, linked it with an inner join, and here at the where clause we have a question mark. This question mark will be replaced by the country code. And here's how we filtered just the people from Costa Rica. And this country code, we got it from our IP, geo IP right here. So that's what we're assigning over here. And here, since we got two results, we have two send emails. This here is a loop that's looping for as many elements in the row tag. And then if everything's okay, it goes to our green successful ending. Now, here we are at the designer. The STX designer is where you create these processes and define the servers and everything that you do with the STX. The first thing we're going to look at is our servers configuration. We have 4 different types of servers. We have the free GeoIP server, which is a HTTP server. We have our Costa Rican Central Bank, which is a web server. And then we have MySql database. And then we have an SMTP server. And these are, each one of our processes is hooked up to one of these servers. So basically, so we have an idea how this is configured. If we double click on this guy here, it'll show us that it's a server web, and it'll have the configuration here, the URL, the format, the port number, and information regarding the logging. If we look at the web service, the web service has the SOAP information, the URI, the SOAP action, the SOAP version, port, and namespace. If we look at MySql server, we see that it's a MySql server, and we have database, password, port, server, username. And on the mail SMTP server, we see the usual data that an SMTP server asks for: password, port, security, server, and user. Once we have our servers all set up, we're going to take a look at our process now. And this is the process send exchange rate. This is the actual process we called, and this is how you define it. Double click, and here you see the BPMN notation. The STX is based on BPMN. So let me bring back the original one. You see that it's a little different, but a lot similar. This is the BPMN notation we did, documenting the process we were about to do. This is basically documentation. So we have a clear view of the process, and we can explain it, and we can show it to other people. And actually we can analyze it and improve it and see things we could do better or add more things to it later. But this is more documentation. In the STX, this is the actual design of the process that's actually going to go out and do something. So this is my start. And in my start, I define my IP source. This is a special keyword, and this will create the tag that will capture the IP address of whomever is calling me from wherever in the world they are. Then I go to my get geo IP. This process has an input, a result, an exception, and properties. In the properties, here's where we tell it what server to use, and we give it a name. Then on the input, we have 2. method and path. Basically, the method is the get method that we're going to be using for this process, and the path is the IP that I want this process to check on me. On this line here, that's where I do my assignments. Method is equals to get, and the path is from my start event. I get the IP source from here to here. If this is okay, well, then we'll see the result, and here's the answer it will give me. Let's take a look at the page we're calling here. I'm gonna write out here the geolocation website, and if I don't put a IP address and just hit enter, he returns me this response on this response tells me that it's Costa Rican code, and basically this XML here is the one that I'm using for my response here in the STX. So I get an input, a result, and an exception. And the exception is also, if there's an error, it'll come down here, and it will go down the fault and end up here. If the process from the get UIP is correct, then I'll go to my indicator, which will go to the Costa Rican Central Bank, and it's the same thing. I have an input structure in XML. I have a result structure in XML, and an exception fault. Now, if I go here to the database has an SQL command and a country code. The SQL command will have the command that will bring the users, the recipients of from the country code, and in the country code is where I'll put my filter, and this will become clear like we saw on the log. If we go to the arrow here, we see the SQL command here written out, and then country code equals a question mark, and that question mark will be this first parameter here. If I had two where I had two variables, I would have a second question mark, and then I would have a second tag here with the value of my second where. And then here we'll go to the send mail with basically the two information, the subject and the body. That's the input, and then the result is to send the email. And if there's an exception, here's the exception. The interesting thing here, it's the loop. If I click on this, here's where I tell it that I want it to loop for as many rows that are on this XML. And if you remember, this is the answer we get back when we filter by Costa Rica from the database. So we have one fila, two filas. Fila means row. So we have two elements of two records that come back from this call to the database. So in essence, when we tell it the condition is get emails output fila, in this particular response, we're going to go two times, one for each record that was returned. And here's where we make our assignments. We're going to assign, I'm going to edit here, and we're going to assign the email that we receive for each one of the iterations that we go here. And this is how we do a loop. The subject and the body for the email will go here to the assignments, and these we do here, subject, dollar exchange rate for Costa Rica today, and then the body of the email, which is basically we're writing out exchange rate is variable, and then here the XML address to where the value of the exchange rate is, and then we append at the end CRC per dollar. We are assigned it before we get into the send mail because the mail is the same for everybody. If the mail needed to be different, like say I want to say hello Luis in the body before I give the information, then I would have to make the assignment inside the loop where I have the information for each one of the records I'm iterating by. And this brings us to the end. If all this is okay, it'll end up in our successful end event. And here we have a sent property, and we can see the assignment here on the arrow, and basically it's the last email that was sent that'll be there. And this is how you define this particular process in the STX. As I mentioned earlier, one of the virtues of BPMN is that you can easily analyze the process and find improvements for it. In this case, we can look at this process here, and why don't we send the message for the Costa Rican people in Spanish and not in English? And this is how you would do that. How would you improve on this process? Okay, so now we're going to apply the improvement to the process we have here on the STX. Okay, in order to find out if the emails were gotten from Costa Rica, what I need to do is put another decision here. And I'm going to move this to this end and this to this end. Put it up here. And I'm going to define it. And this I will call is CR. If it is CR, that's just the name, so that it's something descriptive. But instead of result, I'm going to do an expression. And my expression will be, go to variables, and here are all my data that I picked up as the process moved along. And I'm going to go to get geo IP output and the response. And I'm going to double click on country code, which in my case will be CR. So it equals CR. So this, if it is Costa Rica, if variable response country code equals CR, then he will go through the yes. So I'm going to move this guy down here. I'm going to grab this assignment arrow and move it to the top. And then I'm going to grab the no side and come down here. So basically what I have here is, if it is Costa Rica, go through here. If it is not, then come down here. Now, if I double click on this guy, here's my information in English. All I have to do is change this to Spanish and then go to the no and assign it in English on the no side. And this will improve my process because now the Costa Rican folks will receive an email in Spanish while the rest of the world will receive it in English. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope this has been very helpful for you.